My name is Jordan Ellis. I'm 32 years old, and tonight, I'm walking into a room full of people who once made me feel like I didn't belong in my own skin. It's been 6 years since I last saw my family, 6 quiet, brutal, beautiful years. And now, by some twist of irony or fate, they've invited me to dinner. Not just any dinner, an engagement celebration for my younger brother, Tyler, at a downtown Chicago art loft that's been converted into a private event space. The kind with ambient Edison bulbs, custom cocktails, and vintage jazz on vinyl spinning just loud enough to discourage awkward silence. They have no idea I'm coming. At least not really. The invitation was addressed to my old name, my old email, sent by my mother's assistant with a generic line about hoping we can reconnect. I almost deleted it. But something in me, something quiet and curious and a little defiant, said go. So here I am, wearing a soft navy jumpsuit I bought with my first real paycheck from a business no one in that room knows I started. I caught a glimpse of myself in the car window before stepping out, and for once I didn't flinch. I looked, whole, different, but whole. The wind coming off Lake Michigan is sharp tonight. It tugs at my coat like it remembers me. I button it tighter and press the buzzer at the side entrance. A woman's voice crackles through. Private event. Jordan Ellis, I say. A pause. Then the door clicks open. Before we go any further, can I ask you something real quick? Have you ever walked into a room knowing everyone inside already decided who you were, before you even opened your mouth? If that hits home, or if you've ever found yourself rebuilding from the ground up just to prove you could, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. And hey, if this kind of storytelling speaks to you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us keep sharing these real, raw moments that don't always make it into the family photo albums. Now back to tonight. The hallway smells like fresh paint and eucalyptus. I can hear laughter down the corridor, familiar in a haunting sort of way. Someone clinks a glass and says something about legacy. Of course they do. My parents have always believed in legacy, in tradition, in boxes to check and names to drop. They used to say I was the wild card, the one who colored outside the lines, the one who didn't know her place. They weren't wrong. I just stopped seeing that as a flaw. Tonight, I'm not here to explain myself. I'm not here to beg for space at a table I built my life without. I'm here because something in me needs to see it with my own eyes, to stand in the same room as the people who left me behind and realize I never needed them to come with me in the first place. I'm not here for revenge, not exactly, but I didn't come empty-handed either. The elevator hummed beneath my feet as I rode to the 5th floor. I adjusted the collar of my coat, smoothed the front of my jumpsuit, and glanced once more at the faint reflection in the brushed steel walls. Not out of vanity. Just to confirm I was still standing, still me. The second the doors opened, memory walked in beside me. The hallway ahead smelled faintly of fresh paint and old wood. Golden sconces glowed softly, casting long shadows that danced along the walls like ghosts. And just like that, I was back in my childhood home again. Back to whispered judgment, clipped tones, and smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. I hesitated at the glass doors to the event space. I could hear laughter spilling out, my family's version of warmth. Before I pushed through, my chest tightened. And I knew, before I could walk into this room and face them with my back straight and voice steady, I needed to look back. To remember why I ever had to walk away. I was born Jordan Elise Ellis in a part of Chicago that people like to call the lakefront elite. Old money, old politics, and older expectations. My mother, Charlotte, was the sort of woman who wrote thank you notes in calligraphy and never allowed anything as undignified as paper napkins at her table. She didn't raise children, she curated them. My father, Marshall, a partner in a top-tier firm, always believed success was a suit size and a surname. He smiled often, but rarely with his eyes. I was the oldest. The trial run, Charlotte once joked at a garden party. I was soft-spoken, observant, and too quick to ask why. I liked patterns, not just the ones on dresses or wallpaper, but the invisible ones between people. I noticed when Charlotte's tone changed depending on who was in the room. I watched how my father grew louder when silence pressed in too close. And then there was Tyler, my younger brother. He was built for their world, born with that gleam in his eye that made teachers forgive late homework and adults give second helpings. He was golden in every sense, sandy blonde, tall, athletic, charming without trying. He was what my parents had envisioned when they imagined a legacy. I was the exception they hadn't planned for. I painted, I read poetry. I asked too many questions about why money mattered more than kindness. When I was 10, I turned the back of my math notebook into a flipbook animation of a woman dancing. My teacher praised me. My mother asked why I was wasting ink. When I got into Northwestern on a partial art scholarship, Charlotte smiled and said, "That's sweet, but you'll major in communications, of course." I didn't argue, not at first. I hadn't yet learned that silence can become a prison you build with your own hands. College was supposed to be my escape. Instead, it became another cage, just dressed up in shinier expectations. I tried. I joined the student government. I interned with an ad agency one summer. I networked, smiled, dressed the part, and I felt hollow, like I was playing a version of myself designed by someone else. Late at night, I painted. Watercolors mostly. I'd lock myself in my dorm's shared studio and let the hours pass with brushstrokes and music. Sometimes I'd post my work anonymously online. And then, unexpectedly, people started buying it. At first, it was enough to pay for supplies, then rent, then everything. I opened a tiny Etsy store under the name Juniper and Brush. Orders came in steadily. I designed greeting cards, printables, wall art. One of my hand-lettered quotes went viral on Pinterest. Suddenly, art wasn't just passion, it was freedom. But freedom, in my family, always came with conditions. When I told my parents I was leaving school during my junior year to pursue Juniper and Brush full-time, the reaction was swift. Charlotte didn't yell. She folded her hands over her lap and said, "I hope you understand that we won't support a lifestyle we can't respect." "Marshall," he sighed, "you're throwing away a perfectly good future for what? Internet fans." Tyler didn't say much. He looked disappointed, and that somehow hurt more than the other's judgment. I packed my things, took a train back to the city, and moved into a fourth-floor walk-up with uneven heating and a bathroom that hissed like it had asthma. It was the first time I'd ever breathed on my own. Those first 2 years were brutal. I worked from morning to midnight, painted until my wrist ached, packaged orders with tissue paper and handwritten notes, learned to build a website, paid my taxes late once and cried over it for a week, but I was free. I worked from cafes and street corners. I taught workshops. I partnered with a friend from college to run pop-up art classes in small bookstores and diners. And when my landlord raised rent past what I could pay, I moved again, this time to a studio behind a bakery, where the air always smelled like cinnamon and soot. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. By year 3, Juniper and Brush had grown enough to hire a part-time assistant. By year 4, we were renting a storefront space. Not big, but open, filled with light, painted in soft blues and leafy greens. We held Saturday markets and Thursday night painting sessions. Locals came, then tourists, then features in lifestyle blogs. By the time year 5 rolled around, I was hosting an art and wellness retreat in upstate New York, collaborating with other creators I'd once idolized from a distance. I had built something, but still, I didn't call home. Because home wasn't safety, it was strategy. It was measured pauses, controlled smiles, and conversations where meaning lived behind the words. I heard about Tyler's engagement through an Instagram post. A perfect picture. Sunset, ring, Ava beaming into his shoulder. Charlotte had commented beneath it, "One more Ellis legacy begins." I hadn't planned to reach out, and I didn't until the envelope arrived. Thick cardstock. My old name printed in gold foil. An invitation to celebrate the union of 2 extraordinary families. There was no handwritten note, just a printed insert with the address of a loft downtown and a line about formal attire. I almost threw it away. Almost. But something in me paused, not because I needed them to see me now, but because I didn't. Back in the present, I reached the final glass doors. The noise behind them grew louder, champagne bubbles, forced laughter, Tyler's smooth baritone rising above them all. I slipped in. The event space had been transformed. Edison bulbs cast soft light over exposed brick walls. White roses and dusty blue linens decorated every surface. A string quartet played something elegant and forgettable. And in the center of it all, my family. Charlotte stood like a queen regent in beige silk, flanked by Marshall in dark gray. Tyler held Ava's hand, both of them glittering with engagement joy. Guests buzzed around them, flattering, congratulating, performing. I took a breath and approached. Charlotte saw me first. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Jordan," she said, like a question and a sigh rolled into one. "You came." I did. The air kiss was brief, perfume and distance. "You look artsy," she offered. I smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." Marshall gave me a handshake, then added a quick shoulder squeeze, as if unsure of how close was too close. "You're still doing your work?" he asked. "I am," I said simply. "You know, Ava's cousin is in marketing," Charlotte offered. "She might be able to give you some tips on monetizing." I nodded and turned my attention to Ava, who smiled with a kind of open, polite warmth that seemed almost alien in this room. "I've heard a lot about you," she said. "Likewise." The night blurred. People asked vague questions about what I did. I answered honestly, though vaguely. I mentioned my storefront, my team, a mural project we just completed for a women's shelter. Charlotte leaned in once and whispered, "Try not to mention nonprofits too loudly. Some of the donors are here tonight." I nodded, said nothing. And yet, I didn't feel small, not anymore, because I could feel the shift coming. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was in the way my spine stayed straight. The way I smiled at condescension like it was wallpaper I'd already painted over. I wasn't here to impress them. I was here to watch them reveal themselves to me, and they did, in their old, familiar ways. At dinner, Charlotte told a story about how Tyler once gave a campaign speech at age 9. Laughter, praise, toasts. Then she added, Jordan gave a toast once at a pottery camp, very avant-garde. I raised my glass to her. "Thanks for remembering." Someone asked where I was living now. I said, A loft near Lakeview. Marshall blinked. Oh, must be. Tight on a creator's budget. Not really, I said. The table fell quiet. Ava, kind soul that she was, asked if I'd be interested in creating the wedding invitations. Tyler hesitated. I think Ava's cousin already has a connection for that, he said quickly. I smiled. No worries, I'm busy anyway. And then came dessert. The quartet played softly as servers distributed tiny lemon tarts with gold leaf on top. Charlotte leaned in. You should have told us you'd be coming. We could have adjusted the seating. Wouldn't want to disrupt the hierarchy, I joked. She didn't laugh. And then Marshall asked the question. So what's next for you, Jordan? Still doing the art thing full time. I looked at my plate, then up at the family I had spent so long trying to please. I run a business, I said. We just opened a second location. And we're publishing a guided art journal next quarter. Tyler's fork paused midair. Charlotte blinked. Marshall cleared his throat. You're profitable. I nodded. Very. No one spoke for a moment. And I realized they weren't questioning me. They were recalibrating me, trying to figure out how to fit this version of Jordan into their narrative. But I wasn't here to be fit. I was here to be seen. I don't remember who first reached for the check. Maybe it was Marshall, playing the role of patriarch. Or Tyler, trying to assert his arrival into adulthood. Or maybe it was Ava's father, hoping to score points through performative generosity. Whoever it was, they weren't fast enough. Because before anyone could touch the black folder, Sophie, the event coordinator, appeared like clockwork. She was dressed in her usual sleek black, clipboard tucked under one arm, wireless earpiece still glowing. Evening, she said with a professional smile, placing a single envelope in the center of the table. Everything has been arranged. Marshall looked up. Arranged? Yes, Mr. Ellis. The dinner, wine, staffing, fully covered. On behalf of the event's host. The table blinked in confusion. Wait, Charlotte said, straightening in her seat. The host. Tyler glanced at Ava. I thought your parents reserved the space. Ava frowned. No, I thought your parents did. Silence. Sophie turned her head ever so slightly in my direction, waiting for a cue. I nodded. Her smile widened. Miss Ellis, would you like me to let the kitchen know you'll be heading back shortly? Marshall turned to me, his brow furrowed. Heading back where? To the staff, Sophie replied smoothly. She mentioned wanting to check in with the kitchen after the guests had finished dessert. Tyler sat back. Wait, what? I stood slowly, pushing my chair in with deliberate calm. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my palms, but my voice stayed even. This event, I said quietly, was hosted by me. The space, the food, the floral design, the playlist, every part of tonight was curated by me and my team. I turned to Charlotte. You liked the lemon tart, didn't you? Her mouth opened, then closed. I'm sorry, she said slowly. You work here. The word work carried a tone, like a foreign object that hadn't been translated properly. I gave a small smile. No, I don't work here. Then I paused. I own this place. The silence was breathtaking. Not in a romantic way, more like the kind of stillness right before a chandelier crashes from the ceiling. Marshall blinked first. You own the venue. Yes, and the studio above it, and the pop-up gallery across the street. Juniper and Brush isn't just an online brand anymore. But Charlotte started, then stopped. Her pearls shifted slightly as she straightened. You never said anything. I wasn't waiting for permission. Tyler's jaw flexed. Ava stared at me like she'd just been introduced to someone completely new. Marshall reached for his glass, clearly stalling for a coherent thought. You hosted your own brother's engagement party. Yes, without telling anyone. I tilted my head. Would it have gone any differently if I had? Charlotte looked wounded. That's manipulative, Jordan. No, I replied evenly. It's observant. I wanted to see how you'd treat me without the frame of success to shield me. And what did you see? Tyler asked. I looked him in the eye. I saw that not much has changed. Sophie returned briefly to whisper something in my ear. The press feature is arriving early. They'll be in the gallery next door in 10. I nodded, thank you. Tyler rubbed a hand down his face. You're seriously being interviewed tonight, during my engagement dinner. I booked this space weeks ago. I just didn't realize you'd be here too until the invitation arrived. Figured, why not share the moment? Charlotte scoffed. You're trying to humiliate us. No, I said, and this time I meant it. If I wanted to humiliate you, I would have had a photographer here, a spotlight, a formal announcement. I didn't do any of that. I looked around the table. This was never about revenge, it was about release. The table fell into silence again. Ava finally spoke. I don't know what's more impressive, what you've built, or the fact that you managed to keep it all so quiet. I didn't want to be accepted because I made something big, I said. I wanted to see if I'd be respected without proving anything. Marshall set down his glass, but we are proud. No, I said gently, you're relieved. Because now you can spin this into a narrative that makes you feel comfortable again. But 5 years ago, you didn't care that I left with nothing. You didn't ask how I survived. You just assumed I didn't. Charlotte looked at me, truly looked. Her voice softened. We didn't know, you never reached out. And when would I have fit into your conversations? Between donor brunches and status updates. Would you have been proud of me when I was packaging orders on my floor at 3 a.m. just to afford rent? Marshall opened his mouth but said nothing. Sophie returned once more with a final note. The gallery next door was ready. I turned to Tyler. I'm happy for you, I said sincerely, for both of you. He nodded, guarded. Thanks. I glanced toward the doors. I need to meet the journalist. She's writing a piece on small business founders building inclusive spaces. I think it's worth showing up for. Charlotte stood. Jordan, she said quietly, her tone no longer brittle but searching, can we talk sometime? Properly. Maybe, I replied, but only if it's not about fixing anything. I'm not broken. I walked away from the table with slow, deliberate steps. Halfway across the room, I felt Charlotte's voice rise behind me. You built all of this from nothing. I stopped, turned. No, I said. I built it from what you didn't believe in. Outside, the night air met me like an old friend. I stepped into the gallery space, where soft lighting danced on textured walls and shelves, held curated works by women and non-binary artists who had trusted us to amplify their voices. My team greeted me with quiet grins and wide eyes. They knew. The journalist stood waiting near the mural I had painted last year. Jordan Ellis, she said, extending her hand. Finally, I've been dying to hear your story. I smiled. Let's begin. The gallery stayed open later than usual that night. The journalist's questions were thoughtful, less about business metrics, more about meaning. We talked about inclusion, about how creativity is survival, about what it means to create a space for people who have been told they're too much or not enough. I could feel the layers peeling back as I spoke, not for anyone else's approval this time, but for my own clarity. After she left, I stayed. My team filtered out one by one, offering hugs and "see you tomorrow," until it was just me and the soft echo of footsteps on concrete. I sat beneath the mural I'd painted 2 years ago, A tree with golden leaves and names written inside them. People who had shaped me, some lovingly, some painfully. And then I heard it, the soft click of heels outside. A shadow passed the glass doors, then a knock. I stood, hesitated, and opened it. Charlotte stood there. No pearls now, no posture, just her. Eyes lined with something that wasn't mascara, fatigue maybe, or regret. "Hi," she said, voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Hi. Do you have a minute?" I stepped aside. We sat on the small bench near the window. The air between us was thick but not sharp, just full. She looked around the gallery slowly, hands folded in her lap. "It's beautiful. I never imagined." "I know," I said softly. "That was kind of the point." A pause. "Jordan, I want to apologize for more than tonight." I didn't say anything, just let her continue. "I thought I was protecting you," she said finally, "by pushing you toward structure, toward predictability. But the truth is, I was afraid. I didn't know how to parent someone who didn't want the life I understood." I looked at her. "I didn't need you to understand it. I just needed you to respect it." She winced but nodded. "You're right." Another pause. "You know," she added, looking at the mural, "I told people for years you were off exploring. I couldn't bring myself to say you'd cut us off, because it would have forced me to ask why." "And did you?" She nodded slowly. "Eventually." And I didn't like the answer. The silence wasn't hostile, it was heavy with truth. "I used to think you were trying to punish us," she said, "but now I see you were protecting yourself. You had every right to." I exhaled. "That's the first time I've heard that from you." "Yes, I know." She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded envelope. "I brought this. I wasn't sure I'd have the nerve to give it to you, but..." She placed it on the bench between us. "It's not everything, but it's a start." I glanced at it, her handwriting. Not calligraphy, just real. I didn't pick it up, not yet. Instead, I asked, "Why now?" She looked at me, really looked. "Because for the first time in years, I saw you, not the daughter I hoped to shape, but the woman you actually are. And she deserves to be met with honesty." I nodded, throat tight. Charlotte stood. "I'll go, I just thank you for tonight. And for not tearing us apart, even though you probably could have." "I didn't want revenge," I said. "I wanted release." She paused at the door. "Would you have dinner with me sometime? Just us?" I considered it. Maybe, but no clubs. No curated wine pairings. A small smile. "Deal." Then she was gone. An hour later, as I locked up and stepped into the cool night air, my phone buzzed. A text from Tyler. "Still wrapping my head around tonight. You free tomorrow morning?" "Coffee, just us?" I stared at the message, then typed back, "Yes." The next morning, we met at a neighborhood cafe I used to visit before opening my own place. Neutral territory, no expectations. Just two siblings figuring out how to stop pretending. Tyler showed up in jeans and a hoodie, his campaign version of casual. He bought both our drinks before I could even offer. "Hey," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Hey." A beat passed. "So, you're kind of a big deal," he said, trying for humor. "Kind of," I replied. He smirked, then sobered. "I owe you an apology." "You do." I was arrogant. I assumed you were failing just because I didn't understand what you were building. That's ugly to admit. But true." He nodded. "I think," he said slowly, "I've spent so much time trying to be their version of success that I never thought to ask what mine might be." I stirred my coffee. "That's not a question they encourage." "No, but I want to start." We talked, for a long time, about growing up in a house where appearances were oxygen, about feeling like everything you did was part of a campaign, even when you were 12. about wanting something that mattered, even if it wasn't impressive. He told me Ava was struggling with the pressure too. I think we both said yes to the idea of each other before we asked if we were actually right. I didn't say much, just listened. That seemed to be what he needed. "I'd like to bring her to your gallery sometime," he said. "See what it's like to be in a space where people are allowed to be messy." Doors open. Later that week, a message came in from my dad. No long apology. Just this: "I read the piece about you. You have good instincts. Would like to visit the studio sometime, if you're willing." I didn't respond right away, but the following Monday, I sent him a calendar link. Small steps. Healing doesn't come in dramatic speeches or perfect brunches. It comes in misfired texts and awkward coffee meetings, in envelopes slipped across gallery benches, in someone asking how you are and meaning it this time. It comes slowly, but it comes. 2 weeks later, the light in the studio hit just right. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting soft rectangles across the hardwood floor. A kettle simmered gently in the background. The air smelled like rosemary and paper and faint vanilla from the candle Cam always forgot to blow out. I sat cross-legged on the floor, a sketch pad open in front of me, paintbrush in hand, not painting anything for a client or for a deadline, just painting because I wanted to. That was still the greatest victory. In the days since the engagement dinner, things didn't magically fix themselves, but they shifted. Charlotte sent a box of old photos, me at 6, covered in glitter, presenting a painting to a room of clearly unimpressed adults. She'd written on the back, "You were already telling your story. I just wasn't listening yet." Tyler came by the studio twice, the second time with Ava. She'd wandered the gallery in quiet awe, then pulled me aside and said, "I didn't grow up around women like you." I wish I had. Marshall never apologized outright, but he sent an article about women entrepreneurs redefining leadership. I caught the gesture. Subtle, but intentional. We weren't healed, but we weren't pretending anymore either. And that was enough. On Saturday mornings, the studio transformed into something new. 8 young artists gathered in a circle with second-hand aprons and wild ideas. We painted, talked, ate bagels, laughed. Zoe, one of the youngest, had recently come out to her family and was navigating the quiet fallout. One day, after class, she lingered. "I didn't think I could ever have something of my own," she said, "until I walked into this space." I didn't say anything for a moment, just let her words fill the room like light. Then I said, "Everything you see here started with me being told no." She looked up. "Turns out," I smiled, "no can be a great place to begin." Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat at my desk and reopened the letter Charlotte had given me at the gallery. It was messy, uneven, full of things she'd never been able to say out loud. But it was real. She wrote about fear, about her own mother's coldness, about how she confused structure with safety. And she wrote about me, the child she couldn't label, the adult she never saw coming. At the end, she wrote, "I don't know how to fix what I missed, but I want to try, if you're willing to let me learn." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my desk, not because it was finished, but because it was worth keeping. Weeks later, at Tyler and Ava's wedding, I sat near the back, not out of shame, but because it had the best light. I watched them exchange vows beneath a canopy of string lights and wildflowers, and when the minister said, "You may now kiss the bride," I caught Charlotte wiping her eyes. Later, during the reception, Ava took the mic and said, "Before we begin, I just want to thank the woman who made our rehearsal dinner so memorable. and also taught me the power of standing in your truth. I raised my glass from the corner. She saw me and smiled. It was small, but it was everything. And now, sitting here, paint still drying beneath my nails, I realize the moment I stopped needing validation was the moment I started recognizing my own voice. And it was never quiet, only waiting. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after being underestimated, if you've ever walked away from what was expected to build something that felt real, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me your story. And if this one spoke to you in some way, consider subscribing. We're building something here, story by story, voice by voice. Thanks for being part of it. You matter, even when they don't see it yet. Especially then.